Today, I want to talk about this book that for me is one of the best books out there in learning to draw in perspective. How to Draw by Scott Robertson and Thomas Bertley. This is the basis for the video that I did on a 1 year plan for learning to draw. So it's going to be super useful. I've studied a lot of this in the past, so it's going to be interesting to go through the content and give a little tips here and there. I even taught using this book as a textbook. I'll jump right in. First of all, I want to look at the table of contents and go through each chapter, discussing a little bit, and then we'll see some examples from pages from the book. And then we'll wrap it up with overall thoughts and everything. So the book starts with an overview on skill and materials as well. Drawing with pens, paper, drawing on the paper that you're going to be using, if it's going to be digital, trying to learn more on how to use lines, control your lines, do curves, simple drawing in perspective, and a lot of things are going to be discussed here in this first chapter. Please don't do as some of my students did in the past, that is to only practice your skills and line skills before going ahead. I think this is an ongoing thing. You get better and better with line through the years. So it's not going to be a one-time thing that you're going to study this and you're good to go. So keep coming back, warm-up exercises, use these lines really to sharpen your axe throughout all your journey through drawing. So this is just the beginning and not an end and then on itself. So don't take it as an end on itself. The second chapter goes through concepts, cone of vision, vanishing points, the position of the viewer, the picture plane, and a lot of those basic concepts that you need going forward. It's pretty clear in the way that Scott puts this information. Again, this is just the basis for everything that was going to be discussed moving ahead. This is one of the most important, if not the most important chapter in the book. So division and multiplication in perspective, as well as mirroring. This one, mirror rotated tilted planes, this is one I think you should avoid. This is a very difficult exercise. Go back to it once you went through everything in the book, because you're going to probably stay too long trying to solve some of the stuff that is here and not practice with a lot of other things, especially 2D curves. That's going to be very important going forward, to build volumes and two curve combos and more volumetric stuff down the line. I think one of the most important concepts here is understanding the center line of any symmetrical drawing and mirroring. So if I want to mirror this point to the other side, I can use this kind of construction and just mirror it in that direction using perspective lines that go to a vanishing point. So this is really important to have in mind. It's something that you're gonna use forever in your drawing, especially when you get to drawing cars and complex symmetrical volumes and objects in perspective. Chapter 4 jumps into grids and grid construction. It's going to be super important when you're starting to build more complex scenes, not only one object in perspective. You can do a lot of practice without grids, but they're going to also help you to position objects in the three-dimensional space. So it's super important to understand some topics to highlight from this chapter. Transferring scale and perspective. If you have multiple figures in a scene, or you have man-made objects like buildings and all of that, and you want to maintain scale, it's super important that you understand the relationship between figures and the horizon line on an inclined plane that's going to change and all of that. So starting to understand that is going to be really important moving forward, as well as the Brewer method. That's going to be super important as most of the times you're going to be drawing without both the vanishing points on your page. So learning some of the tools to help you build as the Brewer method or diminishing guidelines, you can look that up. There's a very good course on that on New Masters Academy by Eric Olson. So really interesting as well to take a look. Diminishing guidelines is also another very interesting tool to make this happen. Having multiple vanishing points that are outside of your screen, and you can work with that. Also, he's going to discuss a little bit of like CG underlays, so 3D. Using 3D software, I think it's one of the biggest advantages that we have nowadays, especially if you are drawing digitally, or you can print up what you've done in 3D and draw over that, because it really helps improve your visual perception straight away. So you're going to be using a lot of that. It's going to look like cheating a little bit, but it's going to be big in terms of developing your eye and your understanding of like conversions, scale, and everything in perspective. So don't be shy of using that. Like Blender is a very simple tool to pick up. It's very hard to master, but very easy to like play around and use like primitive shapes and volumes and build up with those. So it's really important that you tried it from like the beginning. It's going to be super helpful, for example, for like this kind of assembly and exploded views, so that you can maintain proportions and scale, rotating an object in 3D. So it will be super helpful for all the drawing that you're going to be doing. Chapter 5, it jumps into ellipses. This can be a hard one. So like really go through it one step at a time and taking your time. There are some exercises here that are not that simple, like this one that we are seeing here. It's just a way of dividing ellipses in a simplified manner, but it's like by approximation and not perfectly dividing. But also Scott goes through all the concepts needed to make the formal division as well. And you can find a lot of other materials out there. Please don't stop here if it's getting too hard. It's going to be an ongoing process, especially understanding the degree of the ellipse. So like how far and how close to a sphere it's going to be, a circle it's going to be. So the more you're seeing that from the side, the thinner the ellipse will be. The more you're seeing it from the front, the closer to a circle it will also be. So have that in mind. But that's gonna be like, and 3D can help you a lot here, and also using like a bottle at home or anything that is a cylinder you can use to practice. So that's gonna be super important, like getting your mind around the visual perception aspects of that, and not only the formal ways of constructing. I think both work hand in hand, but the most important is going to be the visual perception. Once you have that done, jumping on the next, it's going to be the final chapter before going into real things. So take your time here as well. Two curve combos, I think it's one of the most important concepts throughout the book. We have discussed that on the symmetrical aspects, and that's going to get way harder here with more complex shapes, rounding of surfaces. It's, for example, way easier to draw an old car that is more like box shape than a Lamborghini or something like that. It's going to be super rounded, and you're going to need to really understand every cut line that it has and how that's working to help you build the shape. So this example that comes here is very rounded and will take some time for you to put that together. So take your time, do multiple exercises, try doing some on your own so that you can really get used to building in perspective. There is a term that is used especially on at Art Center and like FZD and other schools out there, that is draw through. So drawing everything that you're seeing, that you're not seeing actually on the other side, is going to be as important as visualizing that down the line when you have the visual perception for that. So now you will draw everything like on a thin line, and then like put a bold line on top of that to really create a clear read of what you're drawing. But construction is going to be super important, and draw through in this term is going to be also super important. When you get to chapter 7, we're gonna start really going through real things. So first of all, environments. Scott doesn't go through a lot here. He doesn't like dive deep into architecture, construction, and a lot of the terms that could be done here. So it's basically construction, thumbnailing, and understanding like scale and perspective, and a little bit of volumetric and atmospheric perspective, and all of that. So it's going to be a broad stroke over environments. That there is a lot to be done here. If you want to really dive deeper, I've covered this a bit on my 1-year guide to drawing. So there are some interesting segues in there for learning to create different levels of detail in terms of designing a house, designing interiors, designing architecture, and all of that. So there are other very interesting examples in there if you want to jump on that side. Environments are more complex than like simple unified objects. So it's going to be easier to go through like chapter 8 and 9 before going back to drawing environments, as I mentioned on the video on the 1-year guide using the Foundation Patreon. Those guys also like really recommend this book. So it's a big one to have. So drawing aircraft, starting with like anatomy, visual research, it's going to be super important. And all the grid construction, like 3D underlay as well. It's going to be hard to mirror wings in perspective. So take your time, really understand construction. It will help you down the line with all the drawings that you're going to be needing. Finally, vehicles, one of the strongest traits from Scott Robertson. You can see his work on Instagram, and all links are going to be here in the description of the video as well. So yeah, building a lot of stuff like grids, as he says here. Understanding wheelbase and how to build on top of that the volumes is going to be super important. Here is where the grids will help you a lot when you're positioning your car in perspective, especially if it's going to be more of a stronger perspective with the vanishing points getting closer to each other. So construction will be interesting to help you out to figure out what's happening in there. And finally, like more sketching styles and mediums. So he goes through a lot of examples of what to use and how to use them. So let's go through some of the pages to finalize here. So the first chapter, like learning lines, as I mentioned before, and drawing boxes in perspective. So really interesting exercises. This one, I think it's one of my favorites, like getting 2 points and trying to connect them in perspective. That's super big and interesting to control your line. So concepts, as I said before, like where the viewer is, picture plane, horizon line, cone of vision, and all of that. It really is well explained here and interesting. Yeah, duplicating and dividing in perspective. So using what I call the X tool, to find like midway when you are in perspective is one of the biggest concepts in perspective from my point of view. So it's going to be super important when you are drawing, and especially when you're mirroring the symmetrical stuff that we discussed before. So some exercises in mirroring, some of the more like simpler ones, but super important. I think this is one of the biggest exercises in the whole book, mirroring like complex arcs. So if you're drawing, for example, like an Arabic arc and architecture arcs all over, or like Gothic, a Gothic window with all the details, and you want to transfer that to perspective, you're going to use a lot of what's being taught here. So really have that in mind. It's going to be big for you. So grid construction, chapter 4, if I'm not mistaken. So very, as I said before, interesting to understand some of the tools that you're going to be using. Perspective. So I think this is ellipsis. So this is going to be the biggest exercise to understand. And I think one of the things that I learned to help me the most from Scott, and the great part of the How to Draw book is that he has a lot of videos going with it. So it's super helpful to really go through those and like understanding all the concepts of where the ellipse is going to touch and how to check if that's in the right place. It's a very big exercise. Transferring side view into perspective. Now we're back to like the other chapter on volumes. So understanding that the side view, when it goes to perspective, just as we did with the arches here, it's going to be really important when you're trying to maintain proportions and scale when drawing any type of volume in perspective. XYZ section drawing / two curve combo. It's going to be one of the very interesting exercises. Cutting volumes, also important to practice. And as I said before, like do many of this, like even from imagination, like complex volumes in perspective, it will go a long way. So on the environments, I think the biggest part is planning. And I have discussed this as well in my 1-year study plan. So understanding that your front view and side view are going to be great for planning and building and iterating before going to a fully flashed drawing in perspective. Top view is going to be big as well, especially if you're doing like multiple building areas. And it's really easier to understand when you're looking down at that site. Going into the next chapter, observational drawing, really big to understand airplane anatomy and all the parts that go into drawing a plane, as well as like shapes and line quality. 3D underlay and simple drawings. It's really important that you start from the simple and then go complex. It's also true that drawing older planes is going to be way easier than like jet fighters because they're going to be super rounded and you can't understand really well where everything is going. So take your time on understanding that. And finally, the second to last chapter, the biggest chapter, the last one is most examples. Grids, like understanding wheelbases, as I said before, goes a long way in drawing complex cars. And take your time. This is a long drawing. It takes time to build up, but if you do one, the next will be easier, and the next, and so on. So really be mindful of that. Really use this material as something to get you pumped into going through this book. Go through the video content as well. It's really, really good. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this book and your thoughts on exercises you did, what's working for you, what's not working. Let's open a discussion so that all the community can jump in and have a conversation here in the comments. So yeah, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed the view, and I'll see you in the next video.